I'm Sam. I'm Sam from UCAT, the project that's building BCI VR applications. And our purpose is to look at intracortical electrode technology, acquiring signals about attempted movements and attempted speech, and see what we can do with those signals that is beneficial to patients. We try to do that through VR. We think VR is a great medium, but we kind of arrived there at the conclusion, and we haven't done our job well speaking to people who are going to be using this technology and finding applications for it. What are the practical uses of this technology that people such as yourself who are paralyzed can't do every day that they would like to do? I find that problem to be kind of common across all the BCI startups where, yes, technology is delivered, models are built, but what is the practical use of this today? If you don't mind, I would like to do a kind of introduction to yourself, and then we take it from there. What is your journey with BCI technology? So Ian is a BCI pioneer. It's the person who leads the BCI Pioneer Foundation and is also representing a bunch of spinal cord injury patients who, like himself, have suffered an injury and can no longer move as they used to be able to. Perhaps you can tell me more about your exploits and we take it from there.
Certainly. Thank you, Sam. So my name is Ian Burkhart. I had a spinal cord injury when I was 19 years old that left me unable to move anything below my elbows. So I can move my arms around a little bit, but I can't move my hands. And I knew that somehow science, technology, and medicine would improve in my lifetime. And so I was always looking forward to that, looking for something that would allow me to restore hand function, because that was the biggest bottleneck for me, to be independent and to be able to do more things to improve my quality of life. That led me to a trial that was focused on using a brain-computer interface to control a muscle stimulation device on my forearms to activate my hand and wrist movements. That allowed me to do anything from being able to pick up a cup or a mug to roll dice, do a lot of activities that I hadn't been able to do since my spinal cord injury, and those all enabled me to be a little bit more independent. This was, still within a clinical trial setting, so it wasn't something that was vastly improving my day-to-day quality of life, but it was something that I saw that firsthand window into how promising this technology is, and that led me to create the BCI Pioneers Coalition to really amplify the voices of myself and other individuals who have been able to benefit from this technology, and to get it out into the hands and lives of individuals who need it most.
That's amazing, Ian. If I'm going to ask some personal questions, and if you would rather not answer them, that is completely fine as well. I'm curious about, you said you were 19 when the injury happened. I understand that you were on vacation and you dove into a sandbar, and that's the moment that you knew you could no longer, your life is about to change forever and you could no longer move your limbs. What was your life like before you had the injury?
So, like you said, I was 19. I had just finished my freshman year of college. So that was a point in time where you're really getting out on your own and becoming more independent, doing everything for yourself and not relying on, much family support. And I was really excited to continue on with that. I was always a relatively, stubborn and independent person growing up. I liked doing things on my own. And, when I had the accident, it was a big change, because my life as I knew it was completely detoured now, and I didn't know what that held, what the future held. None of us have a crystal ball where we can predict the future, but it was much more uncertain for me because I had never met someone with a spinal cord injury before. I really didn't know what my quality of life would look like, and the bleak outlook I got from the doctors and therapists was definitely detrimental to me early on. But I also took that as a bit of a challenge to make sure that I could always do a little bit more than they said I was going to be able to do.
Mhm. So, if I remember, this is 2010 when the injury happened.
Correct. Yes.
Okay, and then I know that when you first started looking out for the rehabilitation using BCI, was your goal to seek out technologies that could bring you the ability to use your muscles that you weren't able, your limbs that you weren't able to use anymore again?
Yeah. So after my injury in 2010, I kept doing kind of all the standard of care type of therapy and rehabilitation. Took that to a point, and then insurance is like, okay, well, you made all the therapy. But I was still looking for a little bit more. I wanted to be more independent than I was. And that led me to a couple different clinical trials, but most notably the one that was focused on restoring hand function. For me, I knew that hand function was kind of the gateway into a more independent life. And I started out learning about the muscle stimulation that they were using, and then learning that it was controlled by BCI. So that way I could be the one to control it. I would think about moving my hand and it would move just like it did before the injury, and it would essentially bypass my injury by using the BCI to muscle connection directly.
So for the less technical folks, I think the project was called Neurolife.
Correct. Yes.
And
It was focused on putting surface electrodes on my forearm that were able to deliver current to the muscles. So they've used all types of electrical stimulation for many things for many years. But this was a newer system that was developed to be a higher density of the electrode, so kind of a high definition type of stimulation that would allow individual finger movement, because those muscles in your forearm are actually pretty small. To control each individual finger. So when current is delivered to the correct muscles, you can expect to have the muscles move, and whether that makes your hand open, your hand close, or different fingers move in a variety of different ways to allow you to grip onto different shaped objects. That's what this system allowed for. And then we would control that stimulator just by me thinking about it, using a BCI to think about opening my hand, closing my hand, and picking up a different object. And it made it, relatively naturally use the system, because I was thinking about controlling my hand, and it was actually having my hand be the control device.
Were you aware of any other studies that demonstrated something similar? Where I'm particularly interested in the part where you had a intracortical implant that could detect the intended movements at this fine resolution of, say, single finger intentions.
Yeah, so I'd seen previous studies that had used brain-computer interface to control a robotic arm, to move something around or control a computer cursor. But I had not seen anything that restored movement back to someone's own limb. And this was because that was the first time that this was being done. So that was something that was really exciting to me, because it was restoring my own body versus using another device to get that intended movement. Using the intracortical array to do that was something that I knew was necessary, because if you look at any surface type of brain-computer interface, external device, you're not going to be able to get the resolution to serve between me thinking about extending my index finger versus flexing my middle finger or closing my thumb. It's something that you really need that high resolution that an intracortical array allows, so you can control the hand with that specificity of individual fingers.
You mentioned that this was a tool that allowed you to move your fingers, your hand, during the period of the clinical trial. So this is starting from 2014. and I'm assuming that it lasted for some significant amount of months or even maybe years. How did your kind of participation in the study evolve, and what were the first things you were able to do? What did you learn to do later, and what remained as function that was recovered?
Yeah, so I started the trial in 2010 or 2014, sorry, just 4 years after my spinal cord injury. And our trial actually lasted all the way until 2021. So it was a lot longer than I think any of us anticipated when I first learned about the trial and signed up for it. It was supposed to be a 12 to 18 month ordeal to really just see how well it would work, if it would work, to restore independent finger movement to someone with a spinal cord injury. And that was something that I was excited about. But then, once it started working and we were first able to just open and close my hand, at that point it wasn't, very fluid or anything like that, but I saw that the tech worked, and I was really excited about it. And that really was the light bulb that went off in my head. That means, I didn't do anything within my power to allow this technology to improve and get into the hands and lives of individuals who really need it. And so that motivated me to continue on with the trial for, the 7 years that it went on. I was, really excited to see how it works, and how far we could push the device. So after starting with just that hand open and hand close, we were able to refine it more and allow me to do more things while I was opening and closing my hand, like moving my arm around. That was something that, it really increases some of the neighboring noise in the brain when you're moving your arm around. For me, moving my shoulder, when the intracortical array is trying to listen in on the relatively weak signal of me thinking about opening and closing my hand. And I'd say that a lot of those kind of outside chatter to that signal. And so that was really challenging. And then we were able to break it down into your individual fingers. I was able to play Guitar Hero, which showed that you could do individual fingers, but then also be able to use the system very quickly. So it's not like, I think about moving my index finger and then 5-6 seconds later it actually moves. So I think about moving it and it's moving. Something that is very critical for it to be something that people are actually going to want to use. It needs to be something that, you don't really think about how you're using it, you just use it. And so that was something that was really exciting to me. This whole time, though, I was only being able to use the device in the lab setting, in the clinic. And, when I left the lab, disconnected from the equipment, I was kind of back to baseline. It didn't really give me anything that, any muscles that I couldn't move before I started this study. I wasn't able to move them, after the study was over, or, when I was in the study, but the system was off. But one of the unintended benefits of it is that I was able to restore a little bit of control and coordination within the muscles that I do have access to. So through my shoulder and my bicep, because now I was using my hand and working on it all the time, I really improved that coordination in those muscles. And that did lead to me being able to do some things that I wasn't able to do before I started the clinical trial. So now I'm able to, get things out of the fridge a little bit more by being able to rotate my shoulder and my hand in a way that I can kind of scoop something up in my hand, even though I don't have that grip. It does allow me to get things, out of different areas, like the fridge or different cabinets or drawers in my desk and things like that. And that has translated to me being a little bit more independent.
So if you can walk me through this kind of in stages, after the injury, could you move any of your muscles below the neck?
Yeah, so right after the injury, I was able to move my arms around. So I could move my shoulders and my elbow. But I had very, very limited coordination with those. So I could kind of flop my arm up onto my lap or onto my chest. But it was really hard for me to control anything with it. Through my initial rehabilitation, I, was able to learn how to drive a motorized wheelchair. I was able to learn how to feed myself by using utensils that were kind of strapped to my hand, since I didn't have any grip and I could feed myself. But those were still, really challenging activities because I didn't have all of that control. But through more and more rehabilitation, I was able to refine that a little bit better. Then when I started the clinical trial using the BCI device, it really just ramped up any of that rehabilitation that I already had, because now it was solely focused on using my arms versus before, we were focused on using my arms, but also, any of my shoulder strength, or, anything that would help me with my posture sitting up, as well as, stretching and doing things to help my lower body a little bit, even if it was just passively. So this really kind of ramped up that amplitude of focus of what we were doing. And it lasted for, 7 years, which was something that is unheard of for people to get that kind of rehabilitation.
With the implant, with the BCI, you said you first were able to do grasp actions of closing and opening your hand. Eventually, you became more familiar with the movement, and the models presumably improved to allow for more fine movement. How did you even start thinking about closing your hand? This is one of the big questions I have that I just, no matter what I do, I can't relate. And I would really like to know, what is your thought process coming into a clinical trial, thinking about moving a head a certain way, closing and opening it, because I don't even think about these things consciously.
Yeah, that's a great question. And, I myself never thought about it before I had my spinal cord injury. And even right after my spinal cord injury, when they're doing the assessment to see what you can and cannot move, they ask you to wiggle your toes or to close your hands or, move all these muscles that you never had to give a whole lot of conscious thought to. It's really challenging because you just, it's not happening, but it's like, okay, am I thinking about it in the wrong way, and that's why it's not happening? Or is it because the more likely that there's damage to the spinal cord and the signal's just not getting down there? But when we started the trial, and they ask, okay, now think about opening and closing your hand. It's like, okay, what do I actually have to think about? For me, I kind of tried to think about what muscles in my forearm I'm trying to move, and narrow that down. But it was really challenging when you don't have any feedback. And, we started with having a researcher just put their arm down next to mine, and their fingers would move in a certain way, and I would kind of think about me actually having volitional control over that. Then we also used an animated hand on the computer screen, to show it. But it really didn't sink in until I was able to think about opening my hand and then see my own hand open with the BCI. And that's when it really helped me rebuild that connection in my brain of, okay, no, I am thinking about this the right way, because I'm getting that feedback.
I see. When you speak to others that have participated in trials, you're maybe the one unique person who has that kind of conversations. Do you find that to be challenging for others as well?
Yeah, it's definitely interesting because there are some individuals that have used BCIs that I've spoken with, and other members of the Pioneers Coalition, who really say that they didn't have to think about it a whole lot. They were just able to do the action. Versus me, I was someone who really wanted to kind of break it down and make sure I'm thinking about it in the right way and doing everything properly. It's a very kind of personalized experience of something that you need to be changing. But it is, whatever works for the person works. So I think that makes it a little bit more challenging when you're trying to scale a little bit and have these devices work outside of a clinical setting where you have a team of engineers that are always able to work on the project. But, it was something that really was exciting for me to be able to have that experience and see how much we could get out of it. And, being able to design a system that works for anyone is absolutely needed.
How often did you visit the lab, or the lab visited you during the clinical trial? Maybe how did that evolve over that such a long duration of the study?
Yeah, so we started off very intense of me going down to the lab 3 days a week for about 3.5-ish hours each time. So that was, a big time commitment. I was going to school at the time, so I had flexibility in my schedule. But then after about 1.5 or 2 years, we then switched to doing lab visits twice a week, which allowed me a little bit more time to focus on my studies. But we were still able to get a lot out of the research. And, it is a huge time commitment to learn how to use the device and be doing the research that we were doing. But for me, it was something that was so beneficial, and I was really excited to be able to participate and use the device in a way that would allow for me to potentially have more independence if I was able to get the device and use it at home. But also, just be working towards that future goal of having something that can improve the lives of many, many people.
I definitely want to talk about how do we scale this technology and what the challenges are. I'm still interested in, how did you feel when it was switched on and you could do some actions, you could grab things, and knowing that it would go away after an hour or two in the session? How did that impact yourself personally?
It was a little bit challenging, but the fact that I was only able to use the system in the lab helped me kind of compartmentalize that portion of my life as far as, I can move my hand when I'm connected to the system and in the lab. But when I don't have any of that technology and I'm just kind of living my daily life, I can't. And, that's definitely kind of sad that I saw the promise of this technology, but then I couldn't benefit from it fully. But just the fact that I was able to use it in the lab was really exciting to me, and really showed me a lot of hope for the future that I was excited about. So it kept me being animated, excited and motivated towards participating in the study. And I knew that someday in the future, this was going to be a technology that many people would be able to use.
When did you start your studies again after the injury?
So I really took about 1.5 years off of school in total before I went back to school, and just went back part-time. The fact that I was going part-time did allow me to work on my other rehabilitation goals, as well as being involved in the BCI trial. I was really lucky in the sense that I had that flexibility in my life at that point to participate in this.
So 1.5 years after, so we're talking 2012, you were able to get usual rehabilitation services, but you were already looking for technologies which could improve the recovery, or at least could improve the function, the independence at that time. What did you go to the school for? What was it that you studied?
So prior to my injury, I was going to school for video production and editing. After my injury, I knew that I needed to focus on something that was a little bit more of a desk job, and something that, my decreased typing speed wouldn't affect too much, because now I could essentially, type with one finger at a time by using my knuckle and my pinky to type. And so I transitioned over to a finance degree for, within the business school. That was much more generalizable, in helping me get a job.
And your typing speed, that's really interesting. You started with a single finger movement or single finger typing after the injury pretty much immediately, or did that also require some training?
Yeah, right after the injury, I really could not type at all. I didn't have the enough coordination in my arm to be able to hit, keys with much accuracy. I was able to move my arm around a bit, but I would go out to tap a key and I would mess up, quite often. With a little bit more rehabilitation and just me, working towards it and using the keyboard once again, I was able to return to the point where I was, using my pinky knuckle and typing one letter at a time. I would use that in combination with some voice dictation, but depending upon the voice dictation, the accuracy of that can be a little bit challenging as well.
I see. And so you started with video production. Did you say you switched to accounting later on?
Yeah, I switched to a degree that was more focused on, finance, business, and accounting, because I knew that was something that still really interested me, but it was something where, if my typing speed was really low, it wouldn't affect a lot of my productivity, versus doing video editing and photo editing was something that you really needed a lot more precision with your hands to do.
So that's a very kind of practical view. Did your interests also change following the injury, or might be more naturally after some time from creative arts to finance, business?
Not so much. It was always something that I was interested in. Prior to my injury, I had a minor in business, so it was still something that I was interested in. But what shifted mostly was then once I started with the clinical trial of using the BCI, that kind of opened my eyes up to the field of, biomedical engineering and neuroprosthetics. And that was something that definitely interested me. And I'm glad to be able to kind of stay in the space a little bit now, and share my experience of how those devices can help other people.
I see. So you should know UCAT is looking for a CFO, and just in case you're on the market, we can always talk about that offline. Now, how did that? So and fast forward to today, 13 years later after the injury, how is your typing now, and are you using some sort of voice diction service? Are you using eye tracking? What are the tools that you use today for your digital activities?
Yeah, so I still use a little bit of voice dictation here and there. When I'm, at my desk, I can kind of bounce back and forth between that. I'm actually able to type on my phone probably faster than anything, because it doesn't require as much of distance of moving. And I'm able to do that with a little bit more control of my shoulder and not fatigue it as much as quickly. So when I use an application on my phone that acts as a keyboard for my computer quite often, I'll use voice control. I've tried some eye tracking things before, but I noticed that they're relatively slow and also kind of cumbersome, and it seems to give me a little bit of a headache because you really have to focus on, exactly where you're looking. You're not able to kind of take a second and gaze off into the distance while you're thinking about something and then get right back into it. So, what I've been able to do works for me for now, but it also is relatively environment dependent. Most of the time I work from home. So being able to use voice dictation doesn't matter. But if, I was in the office or, out and about in the community, it's something where I don't use voice dictation. But then, also when I am, in bed, if I, I'm and having a relatively challenging medical day, That's something where I pretty much only use voice dictation because my arms don't function nearly as well when I'm laying down.
I see. I see. What about things like, so I understand for typing and for writing things down, you have tools now that you can rely on. How can you navigate on a screen? I mean, how could you accept this call? Is there some sort of an approximation from the phone that you use for controlling a cursor?
Yeah, so within that same application, it does work to kind of have a trackpad for the computer, which works relatively well, but mostly I use a trackball mouse, so the mouse stays stationary, and I can move with the back of my hand, a mouse ball to move the cursor, and then let go and click a button, and that works relatively well versus, when I tried to use any kind of a mouse, I can place my hand down on top of a standard mouse and move it around pretty well, not nearly as accurate, but accurate enough to click around and navigate on for most activities. But then when I remove my hand to then try to click down on the button, then the mouse would generally move off target. So a trackball mouse has been something that really allows me quite a bit of function and still allows me to be rather speedy and accurate with my cursor control.
In the physical realm, with objects around you, is there something that jumps to your mind now? Maybe I appreciate it could be challenging to recall how it was before the injury. Is there something particularly challenging that jumps to mind now that, you really took for granted before? I remember you talking about opening a fridge door. What are some other things that we take for granted that really you struggle with or can't even accomplish physically?
Yeah, one of the things that's really challenging, so with the arm and shoulder movement that I have, I can kind of squeeze two things in between my hands. It's kind of like I have oven mitts on my hand, so I can't use those fingers really well, but I can squeeze something between it and pick it up if it's big enough. But moving around anything that's small is really challenging. I essentially can slide it on a tabletop or a flat surface, but I can't pick it up and bring it to me. So right now on my desk in front of me, it's a big, huge, wide open desk, and I slide a bunch of things around instead of getting something in and out of a drawer and being, as organized as I maybe want to be. The other things that are really challenging are opening and closing any type of container or packaging. And those are things that, just without that dexterity, it's really challenging to do. But it's something that I, 110% took for granted before my injury.
I suppose there are things you can make accessible to yourself. Containers that are plastic probably isn't one of them. But I see what you mean when fundamental actions that we all take for granted are reminding you every day of your situation and of what happened. I would like to talk about the other part now, which is what the breakthrough brain-computer interfaces can do now, and what they still can't do, and where the challenges lie. I think what the academia is excellent at is providing us proof of concepts and demonstrations of technologies before some crazy enough entrepreneurs think that they can scale to the clinic to every day. One of the downsides of this is that they are not designed to be taken to clinics. We know that for speech BCIs that are invasive, you need to say 10,000 sentences for the decoder to learn what is it that you were able to say. Those training times are humongous. For motor imagery, it's somewhat better, especially, after the brain gaze trials that have proven that, rapid calibration for moving a cursor left and right can be done in under 3 minutes for the participants that were part of that study. This is Brandman and others that worked on this. There are obviously other challenges, but I kind of wanted to get your view on what do you think is the what do you think, what have you seen as being the state of the art in invasive BCIs? What is it allowing people to do in these proof of concept studies that perhaps make you believe that it has the potential to scale?
Yeah, I think you hit on a really important concept there as far as, the clinical trials and the research that's done to be that proof of concept of what you can do. There's a large gap between what is possible to do versus what people are going to be able to do in their everyday life when you don't have a tie-in of, PhD students or, biomedical engineers standing by to make sure everything is working properly. For me, it was really exciting to see my hand open and close. But then now, once I saw that was possible, I remember vividly, turning back to the team and saying that now it's time to really get to work, because we need to make sure that this allows me to do anything I want to do with my hand, and that it just works. It's not something that I have to train decoders, a long time to be able to use. And I then need to retrain them after there's been some time that has passed. It needs to be something that can just work right away. And I think that's really valuable. I was able to restore movement to my hand. There's been quite a few groups that have been able to restore movement and feeling using a robotic arm, like the University of Pittsburgh, with one of the other pioneers in the group, Nathan Copeland, who's been able to actually feel sensation back after using the robotic arm, which was really exciting. Then there's been all the work that's been done as a speech prosthesis that I think is very, very important, and is probably going to be one of the first indications that's widely used for brain-computer interface. It's for those individuals who have issues with their speech. And I'm really excited about that, because that's, just an innate human right to be able to communicate with others. But I also see the challenge between developing a system that can work in the home setting and not require, someone to be able to step in and fix all the time. And that's something that's really, needed in order for people to actually use the system. The system that I was using was fantastic in the sense that it was possible, but there were a lot of kind of drawbacks because it wasn't built to be a consumer product. It was built to be a proof of concept. With that said, I still would have loved to be able to take the system home and use it in my everyday life, even with, the drawbacks and the constraints of only being able to use it in, certain activities. But once you bring something outside of the lab and they're using it at home, it is something that you really do need to be able to do anything that anyone wants to do in their everyday life with it.
So some of the kind of low-hanging fruits or kind of obvious factors of what it means to use it every day that you even mentioned earlier, the real-time element of the prosthesis, thinking about moving and then immediately receiving that movement, helps with training, helps with it being a practical tool. The ability to have it work without a need to fix it all the time. So almost, you could extrapolate that to being able to use the technology without supervision for the purposes that you need to use it for, everyday purposes. What about the aspect of how tethered the technology is? I understand that there's some studies that have demonstrated a wireless version of the Utah array. I think this is Cimaral and others from BrainGate who have done it for cursor control. And they've done it successfully, but I believe your trial and most of the other trials rely on large amplifiers with large cables that are connected to large computers in the same room and in the same, ward. Is this a problem?
I think it certainly is. Everyone would want something to be fully wireless and, as minimal as possible if we could. But I do think that, there are certain constraints that you're working with right now as far as the data transfer speed, the, any battery length of a device working without being connected to power. And what all you're able to do with that device, and that's just kind of that trade-off that each person, I think, needs to be able to decide a little bit more of what they want. So that's where I'm really excited. There's multiple players now in the space and working towards different types of devices that might work better for some individuals, and there might be another device that's better for another person. But I think with respect to using a device that is tethered versus wireless, hey, if I can get a tethered device and use it right now, I don't mind it being tethered as long as it allows me to, interact with my computer even faster and be able to, take notes and things. Like right now when we're on a video call, where, I can't use any voice dictation, being able to type out one letter at a time would be pretty slow and distract me from the call. That would allow me to be more productive. And it really wouldn't matter if it was tethered if I'm, here sitting at my computer. If it was something that I then wanted to be able to use in the living room, in the kitchen, or whatever it may be, that's where you would prefer something that would be a little bit more portable and wireless. But I think, there's some balance and trade-offs as far as you can get something that's, connect everything to the wheelchair and have it be portable in that sense. So maybe you do have a cable that's either going, directly to a device or is connecting through a coil through the skin. But it's still kind of all somewhat tethered to the wheelchair, and that's okay too. But, I think that we're going to be able to see, in a very short time now, a lot of innovation in this space, and I'm really excited for that.
Mm-hmm. That's a good point, then. Perhaps the wheelchair is an extension of the BCI and is as portable as the person using it. That's a good point. We could maybe think about it that way. I would like to talk about VR for the remaining time we have. We talked about how important it would be to imagine and be immersed. Rather, you mentioned this when you were in your clinical trial and how people told you to imagine movement. I think you mentioned that there was some sort of an avatar of your hand, and you were imagining closing it and opening it, but it didn't really click for you until you could physically see your hand open and close. Now, in virtual reality, they're trying to make you believe that this is completely just as in real life. So for training purposes and for clinical trials, it might really help with the embodiment problem or the perception of moving your own hand if you could imagine it being your hand and it behaves in a similar way your hand would. Beyond the kind of lab setting for a clinical trial or for a study, I imagine that the signals that were decoding from your motor cortex to drive the movement of your hand and, drive the EMG grid on your forearm to help to move it, still introduced limitations to how your hand could move. It could not either happen in real time or it could not happen in the full extent that the signals were decoded at. So in one way, you had the ability to decode them in a way that you intended to grab objects or to finally control your arm. But even with the high-density stimulation, I imagine that you weren't able to so finely control your hand as you were intending or as the BCI was decoding. In virtual reality, there is no real hand. There is an imagined hand. There is no limitation that you need to extrapolate these decoded signals onto a physical robotic arm or your own arm if you're stimulating your nerve endings there. Do you find that to be an attractive proposition, this ability to move in VR? And would you think that would remove some of the disconnect between how yourself, for example, would find it difficult to believe that your BCI is actually working if you did the experiments in VR?
Yeah, I think VR can really improve the BCI experience. It can be a really nice tool to help in that training aspect of it, to where you're improving that sense of embodiment and agency of controlling your own self in virtual reality. by just thinking about it and really seeing that feedback. I think that helps, sell that illusion of the full control over, uh, avatar within VR. I do think that, VR also adds a fantastic ability for, individuals that maybe if you are tethered to a device, but you can use VR to kind of go out into the world. And now you don't feel like you're tethered to the device. You don't feel like you're tethered to your wheelchair or tethered to the BCI device or tethered to the VR device, but you can feel like you're actually there. And I think that that's a great possibility, even just for entertainment purposes to travel and experience things that might be logistically a little bit more challenging for individuals with disabilities. I also see VR being a great way to really improve that kind of learning curve of how individuals first start with the BTI, so that they're able to, see it working in VR and then have that really translate out into working in the real world, so that they don't have to be, intensely thinking about, okay, what muscle am I trying to move to get my hand to respond? They can just do it a few times in VR and be like, oh yeah, okay, that really clicks and makes sense to me. And then when they take off the headset, they can do it again, and it's still working exactly how they envisioned it to.
I see that. And thanks for those applications. This is something we're exploring at ucat, as to see what is it that patients with a BCI would like to do if there were no constraints. And then we are trying to build that unconstrained world virtually for them to experience it. The last topic, the last questions I have, might be a little bit more personal, but they're also connected to this VR element. So the injury, being 19 years old, not being able to then move around, must have had great implications on your social life and on your self-image, self-perception in the groups, in the friends groups you were part of, but also on the outlook of things you could do and couldn't do. VR, through the use of avatars, has the ability to make yourself to look, and with the use of BCIs, to behave in any way that you would imagine, regardless of how severe the paralysis is. It means that you would not longer be viewing yourself after being severely paralyzed, especially if it's coming from a sudden onset disorder, as being very different to everybody else and to your existing social circles. And that's a kind of hidden benefit that not a lot of people talk about. And I wanted to know, what was the kind of social impact that the injury had on you, if you can recall and if you're willing to share, when you were 19 years old, and how did you overcome those social barriers or self-perceptions until today, Ian versus society, Ian versus friends? I'm very curious to know more about that.
Yeah, when I first had my injury, it was, an abrupt change into anything that now I saw myself as socially, but also as what activities and things that I thought were possible for me to be able to participate in. So some of those might have been, kind of self-inflicted restraints that I put on, like, oh, I don't think I can go over to my friend's house, or I don't think I can go to a party or go out to the restaurant because of X, Y, and Z, due to my disability now. That was something that, took me a little bit of time to get over a little bit, and realize that there's a lot that I still can do now. In my everyday life, it's just thinking about different ways to do activities now. I've been able to go swim. I've been able to travel and fly and do a lot of things that I really didn't think I'd be able to do after my spinal cord injury, because of, learning different kind of adaptive ways to do things in a world that isn't built for someone with a disability. But, I think that's something that VR can improve that by, throwing you into it and forcing you to be in a situation that you might feel a little uneasy about, but it's relatively lower stakes because you know that like, okay, I can go through this experience of me trying to fly, and I know that it's a simulated experience, so I don't have to worry too far about if something happens, I can just hit reset and start over again. But I can at least go through the mental kind of imagery and thought process around me participating in this activity with that kind of lower stakes. And I think that's something that can be very valuable to people, so that they can then keep pushing themselves to get out of their own little kind of bubble in their own comfort zone, to do things that they thought may not be ever possible after an injury, but actually are feasible to do.
That's a wonderful point to end this on, I think. Ian, happy late birthday for yesterday's birthday, and thank you so much for finding the time to talk to me about what is it that you went through and how BCIs can change the world, and perhaps what is the role of VR in all of this.
Awesome, Sam. I really appreciate it. It's always fun talking with you, and this is something that really excites me. I'm really excited to see how BCI can improve the quality of life for people that need it. And feel free to reach out whenever.
All right. Thank you very much.